Okay, a couple of people are going to come up for our final session. We're back on schedule, so we promise to keep to the schedule and get you all out of here on time. While I'm waiting for a few people to come up, I do want to make sure, as we begin to turn to state legislation, some of the emerging issues that are beginning to surface that impact your companies, and also give you a federal update. I want to recognize two people because we're going to start off giving you an update on some of the state activity, chemical regulation, e-waste regulation, flame retardants, imitation gun legislation. You're going to hear from Jen Gibbons, our Senior Director of Government Affairs, who is based in California and is coming up. But I also want to introduce two folks who recently joined TIA. Owen Kane is our Eastern Director of State Government Affairs, handles the Eastern states and is based in our Washington, D.C. office. And next to Owen is Mindy Baker, who handles our Midwest State Government Affairs activity and is based in Chicago. So if you live in those parts of the country and have issues impacting your company, please contact either Owen or Mindy. What's that? Sorry. Okay, so this next session, as I mentioned, I had the order backwards. Autumn just reminded me that we're going to start with a TSCA update, and then we'll move to emerging issues and finish. Over here we have Rebecca Mond, who's a Director of Federal Government Affairs based in our Washington, D.C. office. Pretty sure everybody knows Al Kaufman, our Senior Vice President for Technical Affairs based in our New York office. I just mentioned Jen Gibbons, who heads up all of our state government affairs and is based in Sacramento, and Autumn Moore, who's a Manager of Government Affairs, Standards and Regulatory Affairs, and works in our Washington, D.C. office. So I'm going to get off the stage and let these guys cover those areas, and then we'll come back up to wrap up. So, Autumn?
Good morning, everyone. Oh man, I was hoping I could see this better. I need to have taller heels today, apparently.
Stand over to the side.
Yes. Okay. I'm just going to go into a brief background with CPSC. I'm sorry, CPSC. We've been talking about CPSC all morning. I'm going to talk about TSCA. The original TSCA law was passed in 1976, but it hasn't been substantially updated since then. The law did allow the EPA the authority to review and evaluate the chemicals that are in commerce, and it was designed to determine if the chemicals were safe for their intended use. The law did create regulations, but over time, companies, NGOs, consumers have had less confidence in the EPA to actually regulate chemicals. So states have decided to develop their own chemical management programs. The good news is Congress has recognized this, and they've been trying to address this issue for several years now, but this year there is finally widespread bipartisan support to actually do something. And in fact, both the House and the Senate have passed their own versions of TSCA reform. The House passed their version this past summer, and the Senate passed their version just this past December. The bills are not identical. They do both have very strong preemption language, though, which is our #1 priority. And just to let you guys know, talks have begun between the two chambers to marry their differences and to come to some sort of conclusion that everybody can agree upon, but Congress moves slower than we would like them to move, so we don't have a final bill that the President can sign just yet. As I mentioned before, preemption is our strongest and biggest priority in TSCA reform because we know you guys are struggling out there trying to keep up with different state regulations and now even county regulations. So we are encouraged by this and we are staying on top of it. And just to give you a quick background of what preemption is already in the TSCA language in the 1976 law, there is preemption. It's rarely been used because very few regulations have been promulgated, so there has been little to preempt. However, there is one portion of the law that will remain, and that is where states have identical standards as to the federal, then those can be co-enforced by states, and the Senate and House versions of TSCA reform have that provision in them. So just quickly, to go over the different bills and what they do include. Like I mentioned, the House and the Senate both have preemption language included. We do feel the Senate preemption language is a little bit stronger, but we do support both because preemption is very important to us. The Senate preemption language begins faster and happens earlier in the process. So once EPA has determined and labeled a chemical a high priority, then the preemption kicks in. And this is preferable for our companies. The House does have preemption language, like I mentioned. It happens later in the process, and it only happens when EPA takes final action on a chemical. So when EPA determines that it's safe for use or not safe for use, then the preemption will kick in for that chemical. TSCA isn't perfect. We are optimistic that it will help. It's not ideal, and there are a lot of things that TSCA just won't do. Some of those things include TSCA will not preempt states from requiring reporting of chemicals. TSCA will not preempt state programs that are already in place as of August 1st, 2015. And those programs that actually will remain without preemptive effect include California's Green Chemistry Program, California's Prop 65, Maine's chemical, Minnesota, Oregon, Vermont, and Washington's chemical programs. Well, Congress is moving. They're moving not at a fast pace as we would prefer. We don't know what the outcome is going to be. We don't know what the final bill will look like, but we are very optimistic that a bill will come out this year. There is a very short congressional calendar. I believe we counted the other day, and there are less than 80 working days in Congress this year. That means they have little time to move things. But if they don't push something through this year, then they will have to start all over with a brand new Congress in January. So that means new bill number, new text, new sponsors, new lobby efforts, the whole gamut. So I think we are optimistic that there is a lot of motivation to get this pushed forward and to have something finalized by the end of this year. TIA will obviously continue to do our work and will continue to lobby on the Hill, and we will continue to take a leadership role and also work with the American Alliance for Innovation, and that is an industry group that includes over 200 trades and just helps us amplify our voice on the Hill. And we are grateful to be a part of that because we need TSCA to happen as soon as possible. So some of you might be sitting out there wondering, gee, Autumn, I would really like this to happen this year too. How can I be of service to you? Well, I'm so glad you asked in your mind. We are going to be having a TIA Legislative Day on April the 13th, and we are going to be asking you to come to DC and come help us talk to congressmen and senators and tell them how important this is to your company, and just tell them the story about the impact these regulations have had on you and just how you're struggling just to keep up. I can tell you that you and your stories are the best tool we have in our toolbox. So we need you to come to Washington and we need you to help us out. So I would really encourage you to put that on your calendar, April 13th of this year. We are optimistic that when we go to DC or we have this meeting, that our agenda will be more focused on thanking regulators and also moving into the EPA side of things and talking about implementation of TSCA. So we will be working out the agenda as we get closer to time and have a better lay of the land at that time period. But in the meantime, please put that on your calendar. And if you would like to come to our TIA Fly-In Day on April 13th, email me, call me, email any of our government affairs folks. We're all sitting up here. My contact information is on the screen. But we would love to have you. So we would encourage you all to consider this as you plan your schedules for April. I will take a few questions, or do we want to wait till the end for questions?
You can go ahead and take them on.
Okay, I'll take a few questions.
See the newbies get the microphone.
All right, good deal. I will turn it over to Rebecca now to talk about some emerging hazards.
Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about what does the landscape for the rest of 2016 look like? And we're going to talk a little bit about, initially we're going to talk about emerging issues that are facing the toy industry, things that you will probably be hearing about for the balance of this year, and also, and then we're going to turn it over to Jen, and she can give you an idea of what the state landscape is going to look like, which probably doesn't look a lot better than it did in 2015. So, whoops. Okay, hoverboards. You probably have heard a lot about hoverboards. First of all, they're not toys, but they are often referred to as such, and we'll talk a little bit about that because that's one of the, if not emerging hazards, certainly a repetitive pattern that we see, and we'll talk about that specifically. The concept that very often items are referred to colloquially as toys when they, from a regulatory and standard standpoint, they are not. So anyway, CPSC has reported 48 fire investigations related to hoverboards in 20 states. And frankly, the issue, hoverboards may have their own specific issues, but the biggest issue with hoverboards has been reports of them bursting into flame and creating fires either while they're being ridden or while they're being charged. The issue then becomes the lithium-ion batteries that are contained within them. So to a certain extent, some of the more visible issues with hoverboards are not specific to hoverboards. They're more specific to the lithium-ion batteries. So CPSC has asked retailers to remove some of those products from their shelves, and I think some retailers have complied with that. All major airlines have actually banned hoverboards in checked or carry-on baggage, so you can't take them with you anyplace if you're going to fly. U.S. Customs has been pretty active in terms of enforcement, and in the absence of a specific standard for hoverboards at this point, Customs has actually taken a pretty novel approach. They've seized counterfeit hoverboards, and really what they are looking at is the fact that they are operating under intellectual property protections for manufacturers of the batteries and of the hoverboards. So did you want to?
Yeah, and just to jump in there, that this is a trend that we're seeing. We heard the CPSC talk a little bit about their import surveillance pilot. The CPSC as well as Customs are moving towards enforcing safety standards and regulations at the border. And so this is a great example where CPSC and Customs will identify, they'll do what's called a blitz, and they'll identify a product that's of particular concern. In this case, it's hoverboards, and they'll look at that harmonized tariff code and target more heavily products that are coming in under that code and inspect them for safety and for, in this case, counterfeit violations. But certainly in the toy industry, a lot of people have come to us with concerns about import safety inspections, and so that's something that the CPSC is looking to gather better data and to do more targeted approaches towards those who are repeat violators and less towards those who can be perhaps cleared a little bit more readily. In addition, I'll mention that retailers were asked to remove some products from the shelves. These products were not they weren't recalled. And so there's definitely that dialogue happening between retailers and the CPSC where, well, it might not be a recall, but it's a strong urging to get them off the shelves. And so that's something as well that we do see happening.
Thanks, Rebecca. On the standards front, the good news is that both UL and ASTM are contemplating product standards that are specific to hoverboards. ASTM would frankly amend an existing standard, F2641, which is for powered scooters and pocket bikes. Because if you think about it, a hoverboard is really a sort of a novel type of scooter and probably belongs in that standard more closely than anything else. UL does not have a standard for hoverboards, but has announced that they're currently certifying the lithium-ion batteries to an existing UL standard, 2272. And frankly, this is an issue that goes beyond hoverboards. It's really, there's been congressional and regulatory concern over the issue of a new product hits the market, becomes very hot, a number of explosive, as Rebecca just said, so you have new producers entering the market, and there's sometimes a rush to get products to market. And in the absence of a standard that's specific to that product, sometimes there can be issues. So the question is, how do we deal with those going forward? And in this particular case, I think the issue, at least with regard to the flammability or the fire issues being related to the lithium-ion batteries, I think that's an issue that people have been grappling with for a while. And so the question is, how do you make sure that you apply those existing standards to new and innovative types of products? So, you want to talk about drones?
Yes, I do want to talk about drones. Another hot product that we're hearing a lot about in the media are drones or unmanned aircraft systems. There are quite a few stakeholders that are involved in this conversation and who have an interest in this. And it's a very interesting topic because you really don't see very many topics out there where you have such a wide range of people who are contributing in the advocacy and the lobbying on this. And so you have agriculture who's interested in using these products for agriculture surveying, and then there's realtors who use the products to take pictures of land, and then on the other side you have the pilots who are very concerned about these products running into airlines, and then there's the privacy concerns because a lot of these products have cameras. So there's a lot of noise around, and this noise has resulted in regulatory attempts at the international, federal, and state level. One of our state, Mindy had counted through all the state bills that relate to drones or talk about drones in one way or another, and there's 250 out there. Now, and of course, we're involved in this because there are a few toy products that are out there. Now, in the space of UAS, I guess the spectrum of risk that people are talking about, you have the DJI Phantom, the professional products that are out there, and then there's the toy, which that's the tail end of the product. So our challenge is, how do we make sure that these regulations address the fact that not every single product is a $1,000 product that has stabilizing technology that will be heavier in weight or will be delivering you packages down the road. And these are products that may look like the Millennium Falcon and that your kid's going to be playing with in their backyard, and that's about it. So it's talking to regulators, the Federal Aviation Administration, which is a regulatory body that we haven't really had the opportunity to talk to much in the past, but talking to them and letting them know that the toy industry, that we do have these products that they have the lower weight, what we would presume to be lower risk. And so through that conversation, the FAA had issued regulation requiring that all drone users that have drones that weigh over 250 grams or 0.5 pounds, that those users need to register their products, and that's just to kind of create a culture of accountability. They were concerned that if a product were involved in some sort of an incident, then the user might just bolt, and so they want to be able to connect that to the person. And so we were able to talk to them about toys would be kind of what the weights would be, and they agreed that toys should not necessarily be registered in the registration system. They also agreed that children should not be registered because of children's online privacy requirements. So that said, we do see additional efforts at the federal level. There's something called the FAA reauthorization bill that's going through Congress right now, and that will likely have additional mandates for the FAA to look at this space going forward. So that will kind of outline how the Federal Aviation Administration will proceed on this issue. So that's something we're monitoring, and again, just kind of letting legislators know that this is something that could impact the toy industry, that we don't want little Timmy to be arrested for playing with his Millennium Falcon. But these aren't necessarily the commercial use drones. And then as for state, I mean, the activity really ranges from everything from the privacy all the way to hunters can't use the product for hunting. And then we do see some stuff like all drone users will need to have insurance. And that's something that doesn't seem to make sense for the toy industry, but would make sense perhaps for some others who are using it for commercial purposes. So, we need to kind of create this distinction, and that's kind of an education campaign. But I think regardless, it's important to kind of keep to messaging that these regulations, they need to be flexible, and they need to acknowledge the fact that this is a growing technology. There are a lot of great uses for this product, educational purposes in terms of the toy space, but then also, first responder purposes when it comes to fires and such. So I think that that's something, there's a great awareness for that, and that we're trying to make sure that that technology development is taken into account.
Yep. Okay, thanks, Rebecca. And I referred to this a minute or two ago, the not everything is a toy, and unfortunately this is something that the toy industry has had to deal with, over many years, and hoverboards are just the latest example. It's a longstanding pattern that typically in the media, that products are erroneously referred to as toys. You see it in some of the NGO reports that come out during toy hunting season. You see it in the media frequently. So hoverboards are a transportation device. They're not a toy typically. But the media doesn't seem to have figured that out, and you can see some of the headlines here. Other examples from the past are magnets. Buckyballs were intended as an adult or an executive desk toy, and were outside the scope of the toy standard and were not toys, and yet they constantly were referred to that way. We've seen it with coin cell batteries. We talked a little bit about the fact that these incidents, by and large, were not happening with or associated with toys, and yet toys kept being pulled into the conversation. Barrettes and other fashion accessories sometimes are referred to as toys, children's jewelry, backpacks, lunch boxes. Unfortunately, there is it's something that TIA is addressing and will continue to address, but it's more of an education issue. People don't understand that toys are very highly regulated, but not everything is a toy, and not everything is subject to those stringent standards. And while we're very careful what we refer to as a toy, those in the media and people outside the industry typically are not. So it is something that we'll continue to have to deal with. So it has a very specific meaning. Lithium-ion batteries. ASTM F963, as I mentioned, will include requirements to address the thermal runaway issue. In a way, we were sort of lucky in that we had some minor incidents with toy helicopters a couple of years ago. Working very closely with the CPSC staff, we think we've developed some very effective measures that will address that issue for lithium-ion batteries during charging or use. And there are several promising technologies under investigation, using nanotechnology in the polymer separators between the electrodes, a number of others. The idea is to try to either ameliorate the thermal runaway issue or prevent it entirely. And I expect to see some of those technologies on the market probably in the next 5 to 10 years, although they're not ready for commercialization at this point. There have been a number of things going on in the transportation space, however, related to lithium-ion batteries, and the hoverboard issue has only accelerated that conversation. So I'm going to let Rebecca talk about that a little bit.
Well, just briefly, the transportation of lithium-ion batteries, the concern started many years ago, and so there have been developments. Lithium-ion batteries and lithium metal batteries, these are classified as dangerous goods, and so they need to be transported accordingly. The International Aviation Transportation Administration or Association, they came out with guidelines clarifying that small lithium battery-powered vehicles, such as perhaps hoverboards, they should be classified as UN 3171, and then there's specific packaging requirements that go along with this and shipping declarations that go along with that. And that's if the battery is contained within the hoverboard when transported, but then if it is transported in a larger package but not within the actual product, then there's unique requirements. It's now UN 3481, and then there's specific packaging and declaration requirements that are associated with that. So generally your freight forwarder or whoever you're working with should have kind of a good idea of these, and you should refer to them, but also the IATA has guidelines that are available on their website, which lays out the requirements more specifically. Again, going back to the FAA reauthorization bill, there was a push to have the FAA have the ability to ban batteries from air transportation. That did not go through. As yet, still there's this effort to kind of align with the international requirements, because it makes sense that, just because you're shipping to the U.S. doesn't mean that there's any changes to the hazard. So that's still where people stand and what people are trying to push. But there are also updates at the international level where just recently that batteries that are not shipped in equipment, so 3480, they have to be 30% charged. And then there's also likely that all passenger flights, you will no longer be able to carry your spare lithium-ion batteries with you. So.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is going to impact, I think, certainly toy manufacturers. If you have a product which includes a lithium-ion battery, just be aware that you may be precluded. If you get behind on schedule, you may be precluded from air freighting it in order to meet a deadline, or at least you may be precluded from having that product loaded on a passenger flight. It may have to go on as air cargo on a cargo flight. And then also, if any of you ship direct to consumers, you may have to ship ground. You may not be able to send something. You may not be able to offer first or second day service. It may have to go ground and get to the consumer in 5 to 7 days. So it's something that potentially could have a significant impact, at least from the standpoint of meeting deadlines for manufacturing and also customer service if you have a B2C business at all. Toy guns. This is another issue. There were some well-publicized incidents last year where, unfortunately, individuals were shot by police while they were holding firearms that were not real but appeared to be real. And so we've seen a proliferation of bills, and Jen can talk a little bit about that at the state level. There have been a number of them, but just the lay of the land here is, and by the way, these guidelines that I'm going to talk about are available on the TIA site. So if any of you make imitation weapons or toy guns of any kind, you can refer to these guidelines. What we've tried to do, even though we can't offer legal advice, is we've tried to provide some guidance to keep people out of trouble, that if you meet these guidelines, in general, you should be reasonably okay in most jurisdictions. So the lay of the land is that there are comprehensive federal requirements. They've been in place for a number of years. They address marking of toy guns and imitation firearms. They're at 15 CFR 1150. Interestingly enough, this is one of the few regulations on toys that are not under the jurisdiction of the CPSC. It's actually under the Department of Commerce. Why Congress chose to do that, we're not sure, but that's where it is. And interestingly enough, there's clear preemptive language in that statute and also in the regulation. Congress couldn't have been more crystal clear in saying that, look, these are the requirements for marking of toy guns and imitation firearms, and states are perfectly welcome to institute requirements that are identical, but if they deviate from identical or they're not consistent with those requirements, then they are preempted. However, that hasn't stopped states and localities, as you probably would expect. So there have been several states, even local jurisdictions, have enacted those requirements which conflict or differ in some way with those long-established federal requirements. So the federal requirements are that toy guns exhibit at least one of the following characteristics. It has to be transparent. It has to be of a predominant color. There's an approved list of colors that are sort of non-gun-like, that are difficult to be confused with a real weapon. They have to have a blaze orange plug in the muzzle end of the barrel if they're non-functional, or a blaze orange band at the muzzle end of the barrel. So if you meet one of those requirements, you have complied with those federal marking requirements. State and local imitation firearm statutes generally define imitation weapon to mean any device or object made of plastic, wood, metal, other material, but basically the test is if you could, if a reasonable person could perceive it to be an actual firearm or an air rifle or a pellet gun or a BB gun. Excuse me. There is an exclusion in many of these for antique firearms, ones that were if you have an imitation firearm which looks like a weapon which was produced before 1898, you're exempt because it's felt that people are probably not going to, if you're walking around with a musket, people are probably not going to figure it's a real firearm. However, New York City, just to call out, does not make that distinction for pre-1998 imitation firearms. So here are the recommendations, and these, as I said, these guidelines are available on the TIA site in the public area of the site. Coloration should be in one of those federally specified colors. And by the way, the federal requirement is also, as an appendix, is also available on the site, so you can find it there. Toy guns should never have a laser pointer affixed to them. That's become an issue. Even if you comply with all of the other requirements, if you have a laser pointer attached to a toy gun, that obviously could lead someone to believe that it's a real weapon, particularly if you use a laser, which is typical of those used for sighting on real weapons, usually red or green. I've seen some blue ones out there as well, or that the idea is that you don't want to do anything that could make that toy gun be confused with a real firearm. But you could use another light source. Obviously we've seen some, futuristic ray guns that light up. If you have a source that is not a laser pointer, that certainly would be considered acceptable. Interestingly enough, the federal requirement allows blue as one of the approved colors, but some of the state requirements do not. However, I think when we've looked at it, we think the intent of those state requirements was to eliminate something like dark blue, like bluing that's used on a steel gun. However, bright blue would certainly be considered acceptable, and it is acceptable under the federal requirements. And also, there is this issue of predominant color. So in other words, you can have black or steel blue or silver or aluminum on the exterior surface if it's an accent color. In other words, certainly the whole gun cannot be colored that. You have to have one of the federally approved colors be predominant. However, you can have some accents that are of those colors that are forbidden by the requirements. And that's been defined in conversations with the New York Attorney General and others as not more than 50% of the total visible surface area. So in other words, if it's less than that, it is considered allowable. But again, it should be an accent, not predominant. And some manufacturers, even though this isn't mandatory, elect to sort of use a belt and suspenders approach, either bright exterior colors and a barrel plug or a barrel band. So obviously a plug is not going to work on something that has to fire a projectile. So you may want to consider using more than one of the federally approved methods to mark the item. And then toy guns that are futuristic, typically are not considered to be reasonably perceived to be a real firearm. And so if they don't resemble a real weapon in configuration, they generally don't, as a legal matter, don't need to meet any of those federal options. But you have to be really sure that they can't be misperceived as a real weapon. So if you have any doubt, I would say adhere to the federal marking requirements. And then again, if you operate an internet site, New York is one of the states where the Attorney General has been extremely active in terms of enforcement. So if you're going to offer something that doesn't comply, if it's federally compliant but doesn't meet the above requirements, you certainly should display a disclaimer that they're not for sale in New York, or somehow limit your sales in New York. Otherwise, that could potentially be an issue. Expanding materials. I mentioned this while we were talking about F963. There were several incidents of children swallowing these super absorbent acrylic polymers, the gel balls. Not all of them were toys. There were some items that were sold as toys, but there also were a number of incidents with gel balls that are sold for florists' use, where the idea is that you hydrate them and then put them in a flower pot so that they slowly release water. and keep the plant hydrated. And there have been a number of incidents with those products, even though they're not toys. So I think I went through some of this when we talked about F963. It doesn't currently have an expanding materials requirement. We looked at the EN ISO requirement, decided that it would have eliminated too many products that just aren't an issue. And so we've got a soaking test for up to 72 hours, and then we use a gauge which is sized to approximate a child's pyloric sphincter, which is the muscular ring at the lower end of the stomach, which seems to be the choke point, if you will, or the limiting dimension within the digestive tract. So if an item passes through that gauge or disintegrates during the test, it's considered to be acceptable. Excuse me. Okay, thank you. And I think we'll, you want us to take questions before you get on to state? Okay, any questions on what we've covered before we turn it over to Jen? Yeah. Rachel, if you could wait for the mic, that way everybody can hear the question.
Thank you. This is for Rebecca. Are certain helicopters considered subject to the drone requirements?
Yes, so all of the model helicopters that have been on the shelves for years, if they weigh above 0.5 pounds, then any user of that product needs to register it, and that includes products that were purchased years ago, so they will need to register those.
I have two questions, actually. First, on the lithium-ion batteries, is there going to be any exemption for low-capacity batteries? And related to that, on the hoverboards, do we have any data as to the cause of the, all those incidences? Is it the battery construction itself, or was it a combination of poor circuit design?
First question is, in terms, I assume you're asking about the F963 for low-capacity batteries, and the answer is no. And the reason is that the incidents that occurred, believe it or not, occurred with some very small helicopters. You're talking about something this big. Obviously, the battery is low capacity, but yet either during charging or during use, there was still enough heat generated by a thermal runaway to cause the item to ignite. And so we did not put an exemption in there for low capacity batteries. I'm sorry, second part of your question was? The hoverboard. Yeah. Interestingly enough, I know a lot of the incidents in the past with other products have been manufacturing issues with the batteries themselves. I think the investigation is ongoing, so I don't know that somebody can say definitively at this point whether it's one or the other or a combination of the two. So, anybody from the CPSC want to opine on that at this point?
You're correct. We cannot say definitively.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Rick. Yep. Here, we can get you a microphone. Rick?
I am aware of what's going on, and to best of my knowledge, I can't say what's going on. It has to be. It's not been released for the public yet.
Thank you. We have one in the back there.
Hi, I'm Scott Simmons. I'm the director of the Investigations Division for Compliance. So I'm responsible for that investigation on the hoverboards. And as my colleague just said, we can't tell you anything. It is ongoing. And we've looked at a lot of these things. We've met with a lot of federal agents, and we've discussed all kinds of things, from counterfeit battery to manufacturing problems, as you suggested as well. And a couple of things I want to point out just to add to your conversation. I know you mentioned IATA, and you mentioned some F963 on the toys in respect to the lithium batteries. Fortunately for me, I'm formerly Director of Special Investigations with DOT, Pipeline Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, who does the regulations that are in association with lithium batteries.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I suspect that because we are talking about a number of different products, a number of different manufacturers, it may actually turn out that there are multiple causes of what's going on. So we'll have to wait until that investigation, is completed. And thanks for the clarification. When I answered the question about the exemption for small capacity batteries, the gentleman in the back is absolutely right. There is an exemption based on size in terms of transportation. When I said there was no exemption, I was referring to the F963 requirements. So, yes. Other questions? Yes.
If this is on the toy guns, if we're not making, things that look like guns, but we're making water blasters, space blasters and stuff like that, should we feel confident that we can go forward without having problems because it has a trigger on it?
The requirements apply to toy guns, as in the regulation it says toy guns and imitation firearms. So if you have a product, it doesn't apply to all projectile toys. It doesn't apply to all items that squirt water. It applies only to items that could reasonably be perceived by, an average citizen or a police officer to be a real weapon. And so you're going to have to make the call on your particular product whether somebody could mistake it for a real weapon. And if there is a possibility that could occur, we would certainly recommend that you adopt one or more of the federal marking requirements to make sure that you don't run into trouble.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, with that, we're going to turn it over to Jen Gibbons, who is going to talk to us about what's going on at the state level. And she and her team have been very busy this year or last year, and are probably going to be even busier this year.
Seem to have messed up the slides. Molly, would you be able to get us back to the beginning of the state slides? Okay. Thank you. So there's been a lot of activity, continues to be a lot of activity related to consumer products, the safety of consumer products, particularly children's products at the state level. Just briefly, a couple of state trends that we're seeing as legislators consider new mandates and regulations related to consumer products. Three continue to be very prevalent among state legislation. First, ingredient disclosure. There is several pieces of legislation at the state level that looks to mandate, either through labeling or online reporting, what's in the product. Legislators think that manufacturers have a responsibility to inform consumers about what is in their product. The second trend would be sustainable design. legislators at the state level and the local level will be considering new laws or regulations that would seek to mandate designing products and/or packaging, looking at the environmental impacts from cradle to grave, essentially, either through life cycle assessments or other means. The third would be end-of-life management of products. There's I think, a growing desire at the state level that manufacturers have extended producer responsibility and that they either take back their products at the end of its useful life, or they participate in stewardship programs, product stewardship programs, which would recycle or reuse materials or products. So these are not necessarily TIA positions on product management, but this is what we're seeing at the state level, so people are aware. TIA, and for those of you who participated in yesterday's environmental sustainability session led by Al Kaufman, TIA does have an environmental sustainability committee, which has put out a best practices guide for members and some other tools that are useful in looking at sustainable design. So as we heard from several of the CPSC, or both of the CPSC commissioners earlier today, there's a high level of activity on chemical regulation at the state level. So first we'll start with some updates on implementation of new state and local laws. This is going to be a pretty high-level overview since we don't have 2 days to go through all of this. I'm just going to give you the highlights of what we expect to see in 2016 that's new. So Vermont continues the implementation of the law that they passed in 2014 that requires disclosure of certain chemicals in children's products, and eventually will create a working group to look at potentially banning certain chemicals. Currently, the Department of Health in Vermont is working to complete their database that companies will use for reporting. They've had some technical issues with getting that online system completed, and so reporting has been delayed or potentially delayed in what was anticipated via the Vermont statute. The online system may be available this spring, and companies will have 6 months to report to the department after that online system becomes publicly available. So reporting, we're expecting at this point, will be required in the fall of this year. Just a couple other notes on Vermont. The list of chemicals that you'll be required to report do align with the Washington State list of 66 chemicals for their Children's Safe Products Act. So it should be somewhat familiar to people, as the reporting in Washington State has been in effect since 2008. However, the major change or departure from what companies are currently reporting in Washington State would be that Vermont is going to require reporting at the SKU level as opposed to the GS1 brick level that folks are currently using in Washington State. TIA is exploring whether through a potential waiver process, there may be an alternative to the SKU level reporting. So we will certainly keep members updated on how that moves forward. Moving on to Oregon, in 2015, Oregon passed a new law mandating reporting of chemicals in children's products, and then there will be, after several years, an immediate ban of any of those chemicals in children's products which are either marketed or intended for children under 3, mouthable, or children's cosmetics. I would note that there is a small business exemption in the Oregon law. So companies with an annual worldwide gross sales of less than $5 million do not have to comply with this law. So as this law has moved forward in implementation, there has been, they're taking it in 3 stages. as they establish the regulations that will implement the law. The first rule has been completed. It was completed in December of 2015. It only relates to the establishment of the list of chemicals which need to be reported. We were pleased to see that Oregon did align their list with the Washington State Children's Safe Products Act as well. So the list of chemicals, or at least they can add to the list later, but the initial list of chemicals in Oregon is aligned with Washington State list of 66. However, all of the reporting requirements are going to be addressed during their second rulemaking phase. So at this point, because there is no exemption in statute for inaccessible components, we don't yet know if those will need to be reported in Oregon. They are not currently required to be reported in any other, under any other state law. And while the Oregon law does provide for exemptions for contaminants where a manufacturing control program is in place, they have yet to define what a manufacturing control program is. We also don't know whether reporting in Oregon will be required at the SKU level or at the brick level. So those obviously major outstanding questions and how companies will be looking to comply with the Oregon law will be addressed during the second rulemaking phase. The Oregon Health Authority is going to convene a Rules Advisory Committee meeting at the end of March to begin drafting that second reporting rule, which will address the questions I just mentioned. TIA has a seat on that committee. We're the only children's products trade who will be represented on that committee. There will be a local business, the Oregon Association of Industries, and the American Chemistry Council will also be members of that committee, as well as the environmental groups who were big proponents of passing this law through the legislature. So TIA will be, our role there will be to raise industry concerns and hopefully have some of our issues addressed, or at least be able to propose solutions to some of the issues that we're seeing as this law is implemented. Once the Rules Advisory Committee concludes, and that's expected to happen in June, the Oregon Health Authority will release a draft rule to the public for comment. There'll be a public comment period, and then that is expected to conclude, and the rule will be finalized in either September or October of this year. I would just note that while the reporting under the Oregon law is not required until January 1st, 2018, it is a biennial report, which means that the first report is supposed to cover January 1st, 2016 through January 1st, 2018. So this is an issue that we've brought to the attention of the Health Authority. They're essentially, because they have not yet told us what the reporting requirements are, they're asking people to retroactively go back and report for that first report anyway. So they're aware of the issue. They seem to understand it. We're not quite sure how they may or may not address it, but we will certainly keep members updated. Moving on to the New York counties, 2015 was the first year that we saw a really strong push at the local level, and it was all in New York State, to pass chemical bans or chemical restrictions in children's products. The 4 counties, Albany, Rockland, Westchester, and Suffolk, did pass legislation. They all vary, but it's generally bans of heavy metals, cobalt, benzene, and formaldehyde. Some of the laws include de minimis levels for total content of chemicals in a product. Others do not. Others are complete ban of the chemicals. Albany, they recently passed an amendment to their original law, which is now Local Law 3. It addressed some of the legal issues that were brought by the Safe to Play Coalition and the litigation that TIA participated in with the coalition by deferring to the Consumer Product Safety Act. But there are additional legal and compliance issues which still need to be addressed, and TIA and the Safe to Play Coalition continue working with Albany County on that. That law will now become effective July 2016 unless there is continued legal action. The Rockland law is currently in effect. However, they did, back in mid-December, pass an amendment to their original law, which did defer to, not only defer to but the federal standards, but essentially just allowed the county to enforce current federal standards. So there is no new obligations at this point for toys under the Rockland County law. The Westchester and Suffolk County laws are effective in May 2016 and July 2016 and July 2016. There has not been any efforts underway yet for rulemaking in those counties. It was our understanding that those counties were looking to perhaps follow Albany's lead in terms of how they address their legal issues. So we're staying very, very close to those counties to see how they will move forward, and we'll keep members updated there. So continuing on chemical regulation, but moving to updates of existing state laws. The Washington State Children's Safe Products Act, which hopefully you are familiar with at this point, we anticipate that they're going to begin a new rulemaking for that program late this summer. We don't yet know what the scope of that rulemaking will look like, but we are keeping a very close eye on it because we have heard that the Department of Ecology there, who administers the program, may be looking to change definitions of contaminant or to further define what a manufacturing control program is, and those changes to certain definitions would have a major impact on how companies need to report. In California, Proposition 65, there's a couple updates here. Labeling for products containing BPA or products that contain BPA may need to be labeled effective May of this year. The Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment has yet to establish a safe harbor level for BPA. So that may require labeling of certain products where there's even low levels of BPA to be labeled or to be vulnerable to bounty hunter lawsuits. It's my understanding that the American Chemistry Council is going to be putting forward a user guide for polycarbonate users that would provide some guidance on Proposition 65 and BPA labeling, I think within the next month. The other big update we have here is the potential listing of styrene to the Proposition 65 list. The Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment has to take action on this proposed listing by the end of April. If the chemical is listed, then labeling requirements would go into effect for products containing styrene by spring of 2017. The other update we have here is proposed new warning regulations. Essentially, the agency feels that the warnings haven't provided consumers with enough information, so they'd like to change the way you're required to warn. This probably has a greater impact for those who are currently labeling products and how that may change current practice. There are major industry concerns that the new regulations will result in increased frivolous litigation, consumer confusion, and some compliance difficulties. So there's a coalition of over 200 companies who have brought these issues to the attention of the agency. We do anticipate that there will be another draft regulation in the spring of this year, and those regulations will likely be finalized in the fall.
Jen, do you want to talk a little bit about the website as well?
separately, but as somewhat of a package, the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment in California had also proposed changes to their own website related to chemicals and Prop 65 warnings. Those regulations were already adopted. Did you have anything specific you wanted to add on it?
No, just it's an interesting move by OEHA. There is industry asserts that they don't have the statutory authority to do what they've proposed to do, but essentially what they would do is they would request additional information from companies who have products which carry a warning. They would post that information on their website. There are real concerns not only about the statutory authority, but also confidential business information, and that clearly this is going to prove to be a boon for bounty hunter attorneys because the state is actually going to be assisting them by providing some of this information that they would normally have to ferret out for themselves.
And I mean, for anyone who's not familiar with the Proposition 65 warnings, they currently would require a product or environment or space to carry a warning label that says warning, this product is known to the state of California to cause cancer. So clearly nobody wants to have that on their product or in their restaurant or whatever the case may be. So moving on to new legislative activity, proposed laws that are not yet enacted, but things that TIA is very actively working on in 2016. There continue to be state laws looking at chemical disclosure and restrictions specific to children's products. We've got 10 states there. These are a challenge, as one of the CPSC commissioners mentioned. You get a piece of legislation in front of you that says this is going to, save children's health, or this is to prevent toxic toys, and it's really hard for legislators to vote no. So TIA is out there with a coalition of other stakeholders trying to educate legislators on everything that the toy industry is doing to ensure the safety of our products. I think the other big category of chemical-related legislation that we're seeing is flame retardants, and it's, I think I've got, seven plus states that are looking at flame retardant restrictions or labeling just for children's products. If you look across the board, and including building insulation and other types of products, there's far more. And furniture, there's far more bills. So flame retardants is clearly something that state legislators tend to be very concerned about this year. As TIA is actively working these bills, we certainly look to make them as manageable as possible by seeking exemptions for internal electronic components. Other state legislative and regulatory activity that's impacting the toy industry, imitation firearm legislation, as was already mentioned. We've seen a major increase in activity on this in 2016 over previous years. So far, we have 12 states where we're tracking various versions of imitation firearm legislation that may impact toy guns or blasters. The legislation, varies amongst these 12 states, but some of them are, in addition to what's already, they're not aligned with federal statute, the majority of them, or federal standards, and in addition to, coloration or the orange barrel plug, they're requiring things like orange stripes down the side of the toy or imitation firearm, and several of the bills have certain barrel requirements, which there's a concern from industry that it could impact or make water guns and dart guns inoperable. So TIA is very actively working this legislation as well to encourage states to align with the federal standards in recognition that there already is marking requirements, which folks are not always aware of at the state level, there already is a federal standard for toy guns and imitation firearms. The other big issue that we're seeing a lot of state bills this year is electronic waste and battery stewardship mandates. There's a dozen or more states are going to consider new laws or expansion of existing laws related to electronic waste this year. The Consumer Technology Association really, leads the charge. TA is happy to work with them on these bills. The bills vary in the impact that they may have on the toy industry, but we certainly track them very closely to make sure that while children's tablets may be affected due to their screen size in some bills, other bills that we've seen in the past have also been so broad as to define a covered electronic device as anything including a speaker. So where toys are a very, very minuscule portion of the waste stream, we certainly like to bring that to the attention of state legislators as they're looking to enact some of these laws. And then the last category is drone regulation, which was already, I think, covered a bit by Alan and Rebecca. Rebecca mentioned there's approximately 250 state bills this year related to various regulations on drones. How drones are defined in those bills is different, or unmanned aircraft, how that's defined is very different. So we're taking a very close look at those to see which ones may impact toys. At this point, I think we have a couple dozen that we've narrowed it down to that we would like to have TIA members take a closer look at. And TIA does have a drone task force that Rebecca's leading, who will help provide us some direction on what impact this may have for the industry and what TIA can go do for members on those bills. So I think that is the end of my presentation. This was a very high-level overview due to time, but my contact information is up there, so if anybody has questions, needs additional information, happy to provide it. I also lead TIA's State Government Affairs Committee. If you're a TIA member and you haven't joined that committee and you're interested, please let me know and we'll add you to the list.
Before we do a wrap-up, any questions on any of the state issues that Jen has covered?
Mindy.
Hold on 1 second, we'll get you.
All right, who was waving over here? Over here.
Thanks a lot. Hey, Jennifer, this is a great presentation. I was just wondering if there are any more details for Prop 65 on the styrene chemical that they're thinking of adding to the Prop 65 list. I'm sure, as you know, with plastics, there's a lot of variations of styrene, and the CAS numbers will be key, and just wondering if there's any guidance on that from California or other sources. Thank you.
Not at this point. So it was proposed for listing. There was a series of public comments. Obviously, various folks at the American Chemistry Council and others weighed in, during that public comment period. However, at this point, it's just waiting on the agency to make their decision whether styrene will be listed or not. If it is added to the list, as I mentioned, those warning requirements would go into effect a year after the listing. And during that time, there may be additional guidance provided related if they establish a safe harbor level, or other guidance that may be provided during that 1-year time frame before the labeling requirements go into effect. But at this time, there isn't any additional information.
Hi, just a question. Oh, sorry.
Well, I was going to say, if I can add to that, just to make sure everybody's clear, the Prop 65 listing is for styrene monomer. It's not for polystyrene, which would only be in plastics as a residual starting material at very low levels. It's not the plastic itself. So,
any thought on how we're going to harmonize these state and local regulations? I know we're trying to fight them, but it doesn't look like it looks like we're almost a losing battle here. So the idea maybe to harmonize.
We certainly, whenever we're talking to state legislators and regulators, we're always encouraging them to harmonize with what other states have enacted. Unfortunately, the state legislators and regulators don't see that the federal government is doing enough, and then none of them tend to agree on what approach should be taken at the state or local level either. I don't know that there truly is a path forward to harmonizing the current state laws that are already in effect. Autumn mentioned, the reform and preemptive provisions of the Toxic Substances Control Act, and that perhaps will ensure that there isn't a continually growing patchwork of state laws and regulations.
Any other questions before we wrap up? Okay, a couple of items, and then we'll get you out of here in 2 minutes. First, there is one other person here from the government that I want to acknowledge, Jamie Furman. If you just stand up for a second quick, Jamie. Jamie works at the Department of Commerce and has worked with our association and a number of your companies for many years on international issues, export assistance programs to help you get into other countries, and a host of other areas where she often comes up here to Toy Fair and makes herself available to the company. So I just wanted to thank her publicly and acknowledge her here today. I probably should have mentioned this earlier because I saw people taking photos of slides. A video of this seminar this morning and the slides will be available on the website. If your badges were scanned, we're going to try to email some of this out to you as well, so there will be ways for you to access this, share it with others in your company if you'd like to, and we would appreciate that. Lastly, I want to just make one more call to action. You heard the commissioners earlier today talk about the company folks getting more engaged. You've heard a lot over the last few hours about how many issues at the state, local, federal, and international level are impacting your companies. This is serious stuff, and I don't need to tell you that. You've given us a few hours of your time this morning. During the course of the year, give us a few more minutes. We may send an email out saying, hey, there's an issue in this state, or federally, we're this close to passing uniform TSCA policy. Take a minute. We'll send you a letter, just ask you to click on it and send it to your legislator. It makes a tremendous amount of difference. If we do a fly-in and you're able to come to Washington, D.C. for a day or two, or to one of the state fly-ins, try to do that. Bring some of your colleagues with you. It's as important as you can do to help your companies survive and thrive. So if you see some of our calls to action during the year on particular issues, please try to find a few minutes, share it with others in your companies, and try to add your voice. As these commissioners this morning told you, and you've heard from other officials over the years listening to them at Toy Fair, they really want to hear from the company people. So if you have that time and you're inclined to help us out, we really would appreciate that. Lastly, let me just thank everybody who's still here for hanging in over the last few hours. We hope you found this to be very informative and worth your time, and thank you all for attending today's session. Thank you.